How long are you going to grieve me?
Yeah, forever.
How long before you start dating?
I don't want to.
No, you have to. I want you to marry for money next.
So I've heard.
6 months in, like 6 months. I'm telling you, arbitrary. But I'm setting the deadline. It's in the document, the when I die document. You got 6 months to grieve me, and then you got to marry for money.
See, I'm getting upset.
Reality
Therapist
what's going
perception.
on.
Bachelorette. Hello and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I am not a licensed therapist, but I am a husband with some opinions about this show.
And always excited to hear what you have to say. Before we get started, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And also don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you can stay up to date with all of the new content that we have coming your way. This is such a small thing, but it actually means the world to us and helps keep us going in providing more great content for you all. Today, we are reacting to The Golden Bachelor, Season 1, Episode 3. And we will also be doing a B-side where we are reacting to Bachelor in Paradise, Season 9, Episode 3. So check that out as well if you're watching along with us.
Can I just say that we have had, we've been very complimentary to Gerry over the last 2 episodes, and rightfully so. I think that he's a really, really nice guy. I think he's done some excellent work in communicating and how he's handled a lot of situations. But to be really honest, I have more criticisms of Gerry in this episode than I do compliments. I thought he handled some situations very, very poorly, and I thought he demonstrated kind of some of the downsides of being kind of that nice guy that I'm really interested to get into and talk about.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I've praised Gerry on his authenticity, and there were moments that I felt like he wasn't entirely authentic this week. And I felt like, he was someone who I was hoping for a little bit of a stronger back from. Like, he has a very soft front, but in order to support that, you need a strong back. And he didn't show up for me in that way this week. So let's get into a brief summary of the episode. We are at the mansion. There are 12 women remaining at the top of this episode. And we meet Askin. We meet the group that's Askin, and they're telling. We also see a talent show, and we are revisited by Kaitlyn Bristowe, former Bachelorette. We also see Joan and Gerry go on a one-on-one, and then we see Joan's very tearful and sad departure. We also see that Ellen gets a one-on-one date with Gerry, which in my opinion left a lot to be desired. We also see some drama begin to unfold in the house between Theresa and Kathy, and we get our rose ceremony where we have a couple ladies go home.
Yeah, I definitely think that we saw a little bit more of the kind of classic formulaic drama that this show typically has. Now, to be clear, I really think pretty much all the drama is coming from one person, right? I think other people haven't necessarily handled it particularly well, but I do think that it's all coming from one person. Agree, disagree?
I think that's what the edit is showing us right now. But like, as I alluded to in the top of the episode in the summary, there's a group of women asking. We have April, Susan, Kathy, and Nancy, who are part of this group. Again, their motto is "You're asking, we're telling," and it seems like that is the group of women who are maybe talking a little bit more pointedly about the dynamics in the house, or like the things that might bother them in terms of what the other women are doing or how they're behaving in the house.
So we move on to the talent show.
Yes, the talent show portion where the judges of the talent show are Gerry, Jesse, and then Kaitlyn Bristowe makes an appearance.
So talent show, we saw several different people with some talents. I want to focus on one in particular, my favorite, hands down.
Okay.
You want to take a guess? You should be able to get this easy.
Yeah, I'm probably sure it was Susan because of the karate.
I wanted to see her break more boards. I wanted to be up there doing kata with her. I am dying to have a conversation to ask her, what is her primary martial arts style? Do you remember what my primary martial arts style was?
Shotokan.
I am shocked you got that right. Yes, Shotokan was my primary style. I did a little bit of Ishinryu and a little Kyokushin as well, but mainly Shotokan. I'm dying to know more. I wanted to see her. I'm so in on Sue. I like her so much. I want to hang out with her. I want, like I said, I wanted to be up there doing some kata with her. Like I just, yeah, I'm in. Definitely the highlight of the talent show for me. But I don't think that necessarily was what they really wanted to focus on. I think the two clearly that production wanted us to see were Leslie and Joan. So which one do you want to talk about first?
I guess let's go with Leslie.
Okay.
So what was your reaction to Leslie's talents?
Um, she's done this dancing thing now 3 times. I'm over it. I understand that this is kind of her wheelhouse, is where she's comfortable. It's kind of like the warm blanket for her, but I would like to see something different. I'm bored of it now. I get it. You're a wonderful dancer. I get it. It's a talent show. But like demonstrate something else at this point. I do like at the end with the baking. I thought, okay, she's trying, and I give her a lot of credit for trying. But name me one of the 12 women on that stage that couldn't have baked a cookie as well. I can bake a cookie, right? So I just don't think that was doing enough to really kind of stand out and show some greater depth of character.
Yeah, I'm of a couple of minds about this. Like, you're right. We've seen this every week, and we get it. You're a choreographer. We get it. You're a dancer. And as I think about her performance at the talent show, was her conversation with Gerry last week when he and she were talking about how there's more to her than what's at the surface. And again, she referred to herself as like kind of like a lava cake, like warm, gooey inside. And yet we keep seeing her lead with this performance, with her sexuality, like with this use of her body and her talents, and we don't really get to see much of the more vulnerable side. And so that, I guess, for me, has me wondering about just how comfortable she is, you know getting a little deeper. And I don't mean like in her squats and her movements, like she can do that, but more deeper emotionally and with a connection. And so that's not a criticism of her. It's more of a curiosity of like, again, we have three pieces of data. We have a pattern here. And so again, as a therapist, I'm really curious about like, why does she keep coming back to this well? What is it about her, or what is it that prevents her from doing something like we saw Joan do, right? Like just lean into vulnerability, lean into insecurity a little bit more. We're not seeing that from her.
Yeah, I thought it was a big missed opportunity. Myself, we know she can dance. I would have liked to have seen when somebody says, "Hey, come and do something." Everyone's going to be watching, and this is your chance to kind of just shine and show something that people don't know you're good at, right? When the prize is, something like, a date with Gerry and a rose, right? This isn't the best person who's performing is going to win $1 million. This is, you are there to demonstrate something new, something more depth of character. It doesn't have to be the best. It just has to be memorable and touching and resonate with Gerry. And Gerry knows you can dance. This was not going to resonate. And that's my big problem. Is it just felt like she wasn't playing to the right audience.
Well, also going to say, and I don't think Gerry, even if he wanted to necessarily pick her, I don't think he's the type of guy that would pick her over someone that's, again, like a Joan. Even if he like thought Leslie's performance was the best, or might be most physically attracted to Leslie, or what she did in her performance, he's just like not that type of guy that's going to like highlight that when there's like vulnerability on the stage instead.
Yeah, she didn't understand the assignment. Very clear. Didn't understand the assignment and was playing to the wrong crowd, is how I would put it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. But great dance. Fantastic dance.
But we've been alluding to Joan. So what we kind of hear Joan say as all of the women, including herself, are preparing for the talent show is like she doesn't really have a talent, so to speak. Like in the same way that the other women do, we see her kind of get a little bit into a comparison trap. And what she decides to do is, again, lean into her insecurity and be vulnerable. And she recites this poem basically all about how nervous she is.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes over smashingly.
Yeah, I loved this. So I think I said in last week's podcast that Joan for me has been very meh. She's got a little bit of the RBF problem. She's, never kind of looks like she's having a good time, is oftentimes just sitting quietly. And we haven't really seen a big personality out of her anyway, or her stand out. And so this was nailed it. Perfect to what I was just saying, in contrast to Leslie. And I think production did a really good job of contrasting these two as two of the main ones we saw. She understood the assignment. It wasn't about being the most talented. It was about, showing something about herself, attempting to, metaphysically touch Gerry, right? Touch his heart in some way, shape, or form. And she really led with a tremendous amount of vulnerability. Loved the poem. I thought it was fantastically written. I don't know anything about poetry, but I thought it sounded good. And yeah, I loved everything about it. So I definitely felt like that was her shining moment. And spoiler, Gerry picks her for the one-on-one dinner. That was actually the reward for winning the talent show, was a one-on-one dinner. Gerry picks her. So they go on the dinner date. They have a really, I thought, insightful conversation. This is a show where we've seen a lot of conversations at this point about the grief specifically centered around being widowed. And I thought that this was a really interesting take that we haven't seen yet. And it was really talking more about, how long it takes to get over. But that wasn't really the thrust of the conversation. What I thought was really interesting was Joan's part of the conversation, where she was talking about her first failed attempt at like getting back out there. And they talked about this, and I want your opinion if this is real or not, if this is real advice. They said like, oh yeah, everyone says like after a year you get back out there. And I thought to myself like that, what, like, it's so arbitrary. Why a year? Is that real advice, or is that just like ignorant friends and family just trying to be helpful but not really getting it?
That's such a good question. And what I'll first say is that on our Wishing You Well podcast, we interviewed one of our clinicians who's an expert in grief, loss, and bereavement. And it was a fantastic episode that we will link in the show notes. Go check it out. And one of the things that therapist talks about is that there is this misconception that like a year is the time frame.
So this is like a real thing.
Real thing that people believe that after a year you should be good to go. And that is what society has put on as the appropriate time frame to grieve, and that is completely arbitrary and often very, very inaccurate. The second year and years to come are just as hard, and in some ways much harder, because as time passes you get further and further away from your experiences and memories with your loved one, and that brings on a whole different type of grief, and you go through more holidays, more birthdays, more milestones without this person that you loved. So as time goes on, it can get more difficult. And again, during the first year of passing, of a loved one's passing, you have more support. And again, people expect that in this first year you might need more support. Actually, and while we have that expectation as a society, the understanding and sense of support actually fades much sooner than 1 year. So often a person is quite alone in their grief, without support, understanding from their support network, from their community. So no, 1 year is not the like end of the finish line on grief at all. So can we please do away with that?
Do you know what last week was?
What was last week?
It was the 15-year anniversary of my grandfather passing. So I can imagine, for my grandmother, I see what a mess she can be on the day 15 years later with tremendous support from my mother. My mother's 104. And so all the kids are there and very, very supportive to my grandmother. I could imagine, as you're saying, oftentimes support kind of dries up a little bit. It doesn't even last a year, how somebody a year out could still just not be ready at all.
Yeah. And I think the problematic thing with this expectation, or this idea that it's 1 year and then you're good to go, is that if your grief is still grieving, if your grief is
So
still
raw.
showing up and raw and still feels so acute, that you start to feel like there's something wrong with you, or that you're grieving wrong or doing something wrong, if you are still, again, not ready to date, not ready to look for another partner, not ready to get close to someone or share a bed with someone or create new memories with someone. Like a year is actually not that much time. And so again, it can create a lot of like shame around the way that you're grieving, if you've not met this arbitrary expectation around that 1 year mark. And I see this come up a lot in my work as well, and feeling like I should be over this by now, and why am I not, and what's wrong with me, and what does this mean? And yeah, so I want to like heavily reiterate that your grief process can take as long as it needs to take, and a year for many, many, many people is just simply not enough, and that's okay.
I'll grieve you till I die. I promise.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I won't date. I'm just saying I'll grieve you till I die.
And well, you know what though? Like I know you're joking, but yes, like you probably would. And again, grief doesn't always mean that you're devastated and sad and that you can't move on. And your grief expands and shrinks over time. Like, and that's what makes grief so complicated, is that it looks different as time passes, as you move on or develop. It's always with you though. You never fully get over grief. You just learn how to relate to it differently.
So let's bring it back to Joan here. I thought, kind of in context to what you were saying, really talked a lot about her kind of failed attempt at getting back out there, and talked about kind of what that meant, and why she is more ready now. I thought it was really beautiful. I thought it was very insightful. I thought it was a nice, deep conversation that we're getting, used to with this show. Contrast against the beach, which we'll get into in part B, where the depth of the conversations were right on the surface of the water there.
Yeah. I do love that the show is normalizing talking about grief and talking about death and dying. Like that is something that we as a culture are really uncomfortable doing, which is why we suck at taking care of people and being there for people when they're going through a hard time.
Yeah. I thought that the way Gerry responded to her was great. Again, it kind of comes back to what we were talking about last week, where, Gerry heard a story and he sort of matched that story, which is something that you told me last week was wrong. And you didn't like that he did that with Nancy. I did, in my armchair psychologist perch, think that the way it landed for me felt different between last week with Nancy and this week. But maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. So give me some insight.
I agree with you that it landed differently than the conversation that he had with Nancy last week. I think what also they were also relating on was the concept of family, because we also hear Joan talk about that her daughter just had a baby, and it was a difficult labor, and alluded to just daughter and
Some
potentially
residual
baby,
issues going on.
having some challenges. And then she talks about how this is the first time in a really long time she's been able to do something just for herself, to kind of step away from her role as a mom and just do something for her. And so I think that there was this element of, again, relating on that. So it didn't feel like a trauma matching
Mhm.
um experience like I felt like it was last week. Like it felt like, oh, we're having this mutual reciprocal conversation. Like it felt a little bit more collaborative than
Less
last week. Less
transactional and
transactional.
more
Yeah. It wasn't like
collaborative.
we're going to trade trauma stories.
Yeah. One thing that I really I noticed, I don't know if you did, and maybe it's just an editing thing, but Joan could have taken the opportunity for the, oh, let me tell you what's actually going on and give you all the detail and make you feel really bad for me and get sort of, some
The trauma rose.
yeah, the trauma
There's the
rose.
love rose, the drama rose, and the trauma rose on
Yep.
this show, basically.
And what I loved was that she held back and there was discretion
Mhm,
there.
mhm,
There's an issue. There's some residual stuff going on with the family. It's really important to me. I'm telling you it's
mhm,
important to me. I'm telling you it's in the back of my mind,
mhm,
but I'm not saddling you with this
mhm.
information right now. It's, I think it shows a level of maturity, and it shows a level of discretion that I would want in a partner. Tell me what I need to know, but at the same time, don't throw all your baggage at me and make me feel bad. We're not there yet, right? This is
Yes.
like on a first date,
Yes.
or a second date.
Mhm.
You suddenly get in somebody's entire backstory and your head spinning and be like, well, I don't even know what to do with any of this information.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I love that you said that. Again, this is something that we've talked about historically on Reactivity TV, is like the too much too soon,
Mhm.
where you almost question the purpose, the
Yeah.
intention of sharing that information. You're right. Joan showing a lot of maturity here, and holding on to what is personal information. Gerry hasn't earned that yet, to
Mhm.
know that from her, and she knows that, and that shows, again. And on the B side of these episodes, we talk a lot about self-respect,
Mhm.
and that is another indicator of having some respect for yourself, respect for your family, is knowing what feels okay and comfortable and safe to share and what doesn't. And I agree, I loved that she made that choice, and it
Yeah.
was a subtle thing to pick up on, so I appreciate that you noticed it.
We've been together 15 years. Eventually, something has to rub off, right? Yeah. So I thought overwhelmingly the dinner went great. My opinion of Joan rose
Mhm,
significantly, from really having very little opinion
mhm.
to really thinking quite highly of her, all around.
A couple of things I want to note here. One is, Joan says this twice. She says it after her date with Gerry, and she says it when she is making her departure. Something along the lines of, "It healed my heart to have this date with Gerry,"
Hmm.
and I love that she again said that, because one of the things that is so resounding in therapy is that relationships, positive, supportive, nurturing relationships with people, actually are healing.
Hmm.
They literally change your brain. And I like that she highlighted this. And again, it was such a small moment, but for me as a therapist, I got excited to kind of hear her say that. I don't know how true it is that, like, through this date and interaction that it did. It sounded like it gave her maybe some more hopefulness.
Mhm.
But I just, as a therapist who specializes in trauma, would be remiss to not also pick up on this and talk about how that can happen, and that does happen, and that is the gift of therapy, is the relationship that you can build with someone, and that's what we hope for our clients to do in their life, is to form relationships with other people that can be healing. And so I loved that and just wanted to put
Hmm.
that out there. Here's where some of my critique of Gerry comes in.
Hmm.
So I didn't love this part of what his reaction to what Joan had shared. Joan shared that she left her daughter and new grandbaby behind to come. And Gerry's response to that is, and I quote, "Knowing what she has sacrificed to be here means that she must have feelings for me."
I didn't pick up on that.
Oh, I did not like
Oh,
that.
you yell at me whenever I make it about me all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't love that, because she literally talked about how she did this for her. And
Yeah.
I just didn't like that was what he was getting from this. It, again, read as insecure on Gerry's part, read ego on Gerry's part, and I did not really enjoy or appreciate that he made this about him. Okay, so they have this wonderful date. Gerry is walking on sunshine, and he's driving to the mansion the next day, feeling himself, feeling this relationship. And we see like the juxtaposition of Joan on the phone with her daughter, I'm assuming, and saying like, I'm going to work it out. I'm going to figure this out. And then she tells the women that she needs to go and be a mom.
Mhm.
And she needs to leave.
I feel like we don't have a lot of great examples of great parenting in media and the celebrity world right now. There really aren't many. You turn on any TV show, we talk about it all the time. Every single TV show you got on, you just did the Summer I Turned Pretty. You and Catherine did a synopsis of that. I want to talk about bad parenting. It just every show just is demonstrating worse and worse parenting. And here was a moment on a show where we saw somebody demonstrate what really true great parenting is. And it was highlighted. And that was something that I don't think we see enough of in media and certainly within our celebrity class and influencer class right now. And I loved seeing that. Heartbreaking for her. I feel terrible for her. But I thought having that out there on in such a large platform felt really good to me because I think we need to see more of that. I being a parent is literally the single most influential and important responsibility that any human being will ever have. Period. It's not close. And I just don't think that, I think people say that, but I don't think people demonstrate that. And I think Joan, this was an opportunity where she really showed that. I loved when she said, it doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter the age of your child. You are always a parent. And this is something I just have to do for my family.
So I had an alternative perspective to what you're sharing. And it's not that I don't agree with you, but I felt incredibly sad watching this, and even sad as you were talking about it, because I feel like the expectation and pressure on women, particularly mothers, is so high. And it just made me feel really sad that even in her 60s, Joan can't have something for herself. Like, does she not deserve that? Like, has she not put in, her child's lifetime? Like, has she not done her time? Like, can she not have anything? And it wasn't like Joan was resentful to leave. I'm not suggesting that at all, but that there are two sides of it, that I think it's okay for women, for mothers, to feel both like love for their children and also grieve the things in life that they can't experience in the way that they might want to because of their role and responsibility as mothers. And that is something that's not talked about enough. And again, that then creates a lot of guilt and shame when moms do have that experience of like, being a mom is really hard, but of course I love my kids, like always having to feel like you need to qualify it because that is what you've signed up for in choosing to be a mother. And so it was just sad for me to see. And like the part of me that, like, again, really roots for Joan to have something that's hers, that she deserves and seems ready for. Like, I felt sad that she couldn't continue her journey, and also appreciated the sacrifice that she made to be a mom. And you're right, we don't really get to see that. We also don't get to see the struggle of making the decision. Is it me or is it my kid? And so again, I appreciated that. The other thing that made me sad, and I really teared up on the episode when Joan said this, she said, again, my heart got a little fixed from Gerry. As you get older, people don't see you anymore. You're not as significant as you are when you're young. And that, like, even just reading her quote, made me feel really emotional, because again, as a woman, that's really true. And again, as a woman who's in her late 30s, I so much appreciate seeing women on TV that are in their 60s and 70s, because we don't get to see that. We don't get to see women who are glamorized and thought of as beautiful and vibrant and energetic, there's so much, I have so much insecurity around aging and gray hairs popping up and all of that stuff. And like my under eyes, sagging and all of that. So I like that resonates with me so strongly as I get older and as people who I mentor get younger and younger, it seems. And so anyway, so I appreciated like hearing that because it felt so validating. I felt so seen in what she said. And I can't imagine like how much more that will resonate with me as I approach my 60s too.
Yeah, I wonder if it's scenes like this why the show has unbelievable ratings
Mhm.
and has really popped. I before we had started this podcast, one of the things I said was I don't really get it. Like, a big part of entertainment is about wish fulfillment, and that's why we put really attractive people on these shows. Why are you going like so far up in age?
Mhm.
And clearly, like I am not a media person.
Mhm.
Like clearly I didn't really understand that piece of it because the ratings apparently are through the roof.
Through the roof.
And the comments that I have heard are more similar to your own,
Mhm.
where there's a level of representation for people that are in the elderly or in the
Mhm.
senior categories that they just haven't seen. And if it's hitting hard for somebody in their late 30s, I can only imagine how
Mhm.
it's probably hitting for somebody in their 50s, 60s,
Yeah.
70s, and
I
whatnot.
mean, I hate to use this word because it feels so cliche, but it's like the most empowering um like show or piece of media that I've really ever
Hmm.
seen. And I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting to have this reaction to seeing these women and hearing their insights and hearing what it is to get older. Like I was this took me by surprise, but it was something that I didn't even realize that I was needing or wanting. And so I'm so appreciative that it's here.
So that leads into Gerry arriving at the mansion. Joan is waiting outside for him, and she proceeds to give him insight into what is happening and that she's made the decision that she is going to leave. They sit down on the bench. They have a nice conversation. He expresses that he is very sad to see her go. They had a great date, and but he understands why she needs to leave. Um, she then goes inside to basically make her goodbyes, pack up, and
Mm.
whatnot. And then Gerry, we have a scene outside where he talks about how he's very sad. He was flying high from the date, and he's really sad to see her go. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, he says to Joan, I was jumping on my bed this morning. I was so excited. So I didn't, again, this was another time I was like, oh, Gerry, you could have just left it at, he said, I understand and I'm disappointed. Great. You can be both.
Mhm.
But you don't need to lay it on thick in
Mm.
terms of I was so excited this morning, dancing, jumping on my bed about our date last night. So like I didn't love that. Like that didn't need to be said. He also said something beautiful. Like there's a moral compass that we both share. And again, great. You understand, like let that be. I don't think adding the theatrics and I mean, he must have said he was disappointed like 3 or 4 times. I just
It's interesting you bring that up. I thought the jumping on the bed thing was it was a little over the top theatrics.
do you think he really jumped on the bed?
I would hope not. He's 71 years old.
It's just not safe at
It's just
any
not
age.
it's not safe at any age, but when concussions are a problem and at 71, hip injuries are
Mhm.
are a death sentence. So like Gerry, feet on the ground, buddy. Feet on the ground, okay? I'm at 40, I'm not jumping on the bed because I'm
Mhm.
concerned with concussions and
Mhm.
hips. Feet on the ground. Um so yeah, I mean, my take on that was a little bit different. From the male perspective, I think we're programmed to try to be complimentary, and sometimes we oftentimes, especially kind of the more nice guys, will oftentimes maybe go over the top. I looked at it as it was over the top and a little too much, but I saw it as him trying to make her feel seen
Mm.
and liked before she left, so she would leave with a real positive experience of him, and of the experience, and know that she made an
Mhm.
impact.
Mhm.
That is what I saw Gerry doing. That is a very male thing to do. Males have this thing where we don't ever want to be seen as the bad guy. And
Mhm,
so we will oftentimes, kind of over compliment or sort of like kind of hedge conversations such that it's like, well, how could anyone view me as a bad guy? I said all the things, I gave all the compliments. And that's what it sort of felt like to me a little bit right there. I'm not saying it wasn't genuine. I'm
mhm,
not saying he didn't mean any of it. I'm saying it's a very guy thing to do. And that's what what you're basically saying is didn't land for you. It
mhm.
was too much and was actually resulted in bringing up feelings for you that were contra to what his attempts
Mhm,
were.
mhm. Yes,
Interesting.
correct. But no, I appreciate your perspective on that because yeah, that was probably his intention, was to demonstrate like I really liked you and we had a really good time. Um but yeah, the over the topness of it just felt like it was guilt inducing. Just want to take a quick moment to let you know that at Revive, we are hiring in our Miami and Pittsburgh offices. We have full and part time clinician positions open, both 1099 and W 2 positions. And in our Connecticut offices, we are hiring for full time W 2 clinician positions. And if you want to work in an organization that values support, empowerment, personal and professional growth, and being part of a community, then definitely check out the link in our show notes and apply. We'd love to meet you.
All right, so then we roll into the one-on-one date. It's Ellen, who
Mhm,
you are a big fan of. I myself could pass. They go on a hot air balloon
mhm.
ride.
Right
Uh,
after she gets kind of glamorized by designer Michael Costello.
this was a complete miss for me. I didn't understand Gary's response to it. I didn't understand her getting a rose from this date. It was all around. I was questioning what I was actually watching, and whether or not Gerry um, was uncomfortable in a one-on-one situation, not giving her the rose.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's my takeaway. I have like no notes on this. It was very lackluster. I didn't see any romantic connection, even like very little actual connection or compatibility, chemistry. And yeah, that's my assumption is I think Gerry didn't feel comfortable not giving her the rose because if you don't get a rose on a 1-1 date, you go home.
Yeah.
Like you don't still get to go to the rose ceremony. And so yeah, that's what I think happened. There's like we didn't see it. If there was something to see, we would have seen it, and we didn't.
Yeah, and even the conversation they had, they sit down on that like bench or whatever. First thing she asks is about his wedding day. And actually this calls back to something you said earlier about how the greater time distance the more you forget about earlier events. And what did he actually say? He said, "I literally do not remember my wedding day." I thought he was going to start with saying, "I don't remember it because it was just a whirlwind," and kind of the classic kind of responses. Oh, so much is going on. You're running around everywhere. I didn't see it. I didn't even sit down and eat. I don't really remember. I look at pictures and I didn't remember any of that because I didn't really see it because I was taking pictures here or running over there. I was, shaking hands at the tables. But that's not what he said. What he said was it was 50 years ago. I see the pictures and I literally just have like no memory of the wedding. And I got so sad for him. But then he kind of goes on and it doesn't really say it, but you kind of implies like, but it doesn't really matter because it's the 50 years of memories after that that is what he's really thinking about. And I think in a society right now that's really focused heavily on like the wedding, the wedding, the wedding. You just went on a bachelorette party last night where you went to an event and they had a two bride
No,
policy.
I'm sorry. No two bride
No two bride
policy.
policy. Yeah.
No two brides can be on the premises. Doesn't matter if one of them is actually getting married there or not.
Yeah.
Can't wear white even because someone later that day is going to be wearing white.
Yeah, I mean that is just we've just elevated the wedding itself to this pinnacle event in your life, and it's really not. It's like it is an important moment where you are dedicating yourself and dedicating your love for somebody, and so it's really important from that perspective, but it's everything that you choose to do and all the events that you share afterwards. That's the important stuff to remember. And I really thought that, and he didn't say that, but that's kind of what I got out of it when Gerry was having that conversation. And that is like a really, really deep thing to kind of say. And there's so much that if I'm a woman in that situation, I'm gonna like start plucking on and asking questions. And Ellen wasn't there. She wasn't at that level emotionally. She wasn't there in terms of the depth. I don't even think she picked up on it or really understood based on what we saw. Um, she just went into some inane commentary about something or other that just didn't really land and wasn't memorable. And it just feels to me, Ellen's a very nice woman. I said at the very beginning, I didn't love her motivations for being here. And this date for me was a complete miss. I just think her and Gerry are on completely different levels. And she didn't even recognize what Gerry put down, let alone pick it up.
Mm.
Your thoughts?
No, I'm with you. Like I said, I this whole thing just felt sort of lackluster. My notes are Ellen's date was question mark, question mark, question mark, meh.
Yeah. And so we're talking, we're being a little more critical of Gerry this
Mhm.
episode. Um, what do you think it's saying about his ability to make it through this process and pick the right woman for him if he's unable to not give Ellen a rose in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be easy for him, and it will probably result in him appearing disingenuous. I hope that he can get a stronger back because yeah, in order for him to find someone that he cares for, he's going to have to, of course, make eliminations. But if he also continues on, it will continue to spur more drama in the house.
Mhm.
And it also shows maybe a lack of readiness as well in order to handle conflict. Obviously, we know he can deal with difficult things, but yeah, I am worried about it because he came in on such a high for America, and if he continues along this path, we're all going to grow a lot more critical of him,
Mhm.
and we need him to make some hard decisions. This is where the audience tends to get very critical of a lead when they're indecisive
Mhm.
and they can't make decisions, and yeah, and they play it too nice.
So you talked about the dynamics in the house.
Mhm.
Let's roll on to Kathy and Theresa. So Kathy and Theresa, according to Theresa, they're the best of friends. You know, they're good friends. We
They're
see
friendly.
they're friendly. We see them having a conversation in which Theresa is basically just talking about her connection
Mhm.
and her date to Kathy, and Kathy is relatively quiet. Kathy doesn't really say anything, at least from the edit that we saw, but she apparently is very hurt by this. Um, the takeaway is more or less that Theresa is boastful and that she is, a foregone conclusion, the winner. I personally did not see any of Kathy's perspective when I was watching the show. Theresa strikes me as just a really nice person, who I think demonstrates some levels of insecurity often throughout this show. And she's talking through some of her insecurity, trying to talk herself up
Mhm.
to kind of like bolster herself to continue on the process as he's out on dates with Ellen and
Mhm.
stuff like that. We see this type of thing all the time with people. There was nothing particularly, unique or
Mhm.
interesting
Mhm.
about this. It was, and even on this show, it seems like that happens on the regular.
Mhm.
So Kathy's response to this was, I thought, quite disproportionate.
Mhm.
Um, she grabs Gerry during the cocktail party and proceeds to lay out a scenario in the house that I don't think is supported by actual video evidence that we have seen.
Followed by her crying. She starts
Yes.
crying, and yeah, Gary's like, "What's going on?" And then she, yeah, alludes to meanness in the house.
Yes. He does ask her directly, who
Mhm.
the person is and what happened. Kathy's not really willing to provide any evidence
Mhm.
because there really isn't any,
Mhm.
to at least from what we see. Uh, and then we proceed to see Gerry give her a sympathy rose, effectively. Um, I have a lot of feelings on this, but before I go into it,
Mhm.
give me your thoughts. How did all of this play out for you? What did you see that I missed?
So while I was watching the initial interaction between Theresa and Kathy, when Theresa's basically saying like, yeah, we talked about like loving to travel and whatnot. And like Theresa's like I had written down nervous talking. And Theresa is insecure. Theresa feeling insecure was my exact note. So I'm with you. I think that Kathy's perception of what happened was not accurate. I don't think any malintent was present for Theresa, but that was how it was perceived and it was how it was interpreted. It surprised me in some way that Kathy had this reaction, because I also didn't think that she had much of a strong connection with Gerry to feel this slighted by Theresa and feeling like she's rubbing this in my face. And so I just kind of felt like, oh, I didn't even realize that you were really here for Gerry. I just thought that you were here to talk some shit and like have a good time. And so that's also why it surprised me. But yeah, I mean, these are two insecure people feeding off of one another
Mhm.
here. That Theresa's insecure, and so she's just like kind of talking her insecurities out, as you said, while Ellen is on a date, and she's thinking to herself, well, I know how much our connection deepened on our one-on-one. This is probably what's happening with Ellen. This probably means that like he's maybe not thinking of me. Like, remember, all these women have to do all day is to think about this man.
Mhm.
They can't watch TV. They can't be on their phones. They can't do much of anything other than think about this person and think about their relationship with him. So that's Theresa
A little
spiraling.
cabin fever
Yeah.
happening. Yep.
Yeah. And it sounds like Kathy's kind of doing the same thing. Hearing Theresa talk about her connection, knowing Ellen is out on a one-on-one date, realizing she doesn't have a strong connection. And so she is filtering everything through her own insecurity of, oh, I want to get close to this person too.
Mhm.
And so that's why she is reading this as, she's being mean to me.
Mhm.
She's making me feel like I don't have a chance. And no, 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 Kathy, that is your projection of your own worry that you don't have a chance. So that's a really good, again, textbook display of what projection is. That is Kathy's own feelings of insecurity and worried that someone else has got it in the bag, that she is transferring, projecting onto Theresa, and believing that that is what is Theresa is telling her.
Mhm. Yeah, and so with respect to her going and talking to Gerry about it and Gerry giving her the what we'll call the sympathy rose,
Hated it, hated it,
absolutely hated
hated
it.
it, hated it. So I've been using this analogy all day, strong back, right? So Brene Brown, she does a lot of research into so many things, particularly shame, but more recently doing a lot of research around leadership. And she talks about how good leaders have a soft front and a firm back, a hard back. And you need to have both, right? Like the soft front in being really caring and compassionate and vulnerable and validating, but the strong back, in order to set boundaries, be clear, not people please, not get walked all over. And we're not seeing Gerry have that balance. He's got a weak spine. That's where like that concept comes from. And I hated that he gave her the rose. It was a pity rose. And I don't, it again made me lose confidence in Gerry's ability to handle discomfort and uncomfortable conversations.
Mhm.
We see, and so we, again, a lot of evidence is piling up around, okay, so he had this difficult scenario come up with Nancy last week. What does he do? He, has this transactional situation. We see him have this experience with Joan, a day before. How does he do it? He like kind of guilt trips her around her leaving, and then sobbing, crying. By the way, we didn't even mention that was the cold open of the show.
Yeah.
And then we see that he was crying about Joan. And so what is going on here, Gerry? That's like what I'm worrying about. for him. Like, and again, how is he going to make it through this season if he can't have a strong back? And why for him is it not enough for him to just simply, again, be there with Kathy and say, I'm so sorry that you're, experiencing this. I'm here with you right now. Let's like, you and I are, here connecting, basically something like that, rather than it was almost diminishing of what she was trying to be with him, is vulnerable. And that he kind of like just gave her a little like pat on the head with giving her a rose, as though she was a like crying toddler having a temper tantrum, and here's a lollipop to make it stop. I just did not like that.
I think Gerry has demonstrated that he has nice guy syndrome, where he has an inability to kind of have the strong back, and he can kind of get walked all over and pushed over, because he's, has discomfort around having certain types of difficult conversations. And this is something that I think is really important. We have seen him engage in really uncomfortable conversations around relationships, around being a widow, around grief, around family. What we have not seen at this point in time is him be able to engage in uncomfortable conversations within social dynamics. And that is, I think, really, really important distinction. It's not that he's not willing to have difficult conversations. It's that the difficult conversations fall into categories, and there are certain categories that he clearly is very hands off right now. And I think that's a big, big, big problem, especially in this type of setting and environment. I also think he set a very bad precedent where, there are only so many roses to go around. 2 people went home this week. I'm wondering, well, 3 if you count Joan, I'm wondering whose rose did Kathy steal, right? Because at the end of the day, he set a bad, and
he's not picking Kathy. Like, let's just be honest.
He's not picking Kathy, exactly. And it's saying I feel the same way also about Ellen, right? So he's setting bad precedent. Granted, roses are abundant, so it's probably not that big deal. But as we winnow down, right? How is he going to handle these sympathy or pity roses when, and he's setting a bad precedent where, now how many people how often are people going to try and go to this well? And how often are they going to sit there and try and run the pity card on him, knowing that, he doesn't have that strong back, and it's an easy way to stay another week and hope that you can kind of make up for it later. I don't like any of it.
What I found actually what was more troubling was Kathy and Theresa's interaction. That was the wildest thing. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. The way that, so backing up, April makes a comment to the group, which Theresa clearly understands is about her. Appreciate the shit out of Theresa for going to April directly and saying, hey, was that about me? Like, and April says, like, you should really talk to Kathy. And so Theresa goes on, finds Kathy. Hey, April said this thing came from you. Kathy kind of dismisses her, like, well, I don't know what April said. And then Theresa asks if they can go talk. As they're leaving the room, Kathy rolls her eyes to the rest of the group that she's, going to talk to Theresa. And then Theresa basically says, like, did I do something? Like, to let me know what I did. And the way that Kathy lays into this woman, it made me feel so bad for Theresa, but also frustrated. Like, I wanted Theresa to have a stronger back here. Like, we just saw her completely wilt.
And accept.
Yes. Yeah. She was so manipulated. Kathy was a bully here. And we see her completely like, wilt and accept whatever Kathy was saying, even though she was like, I was doing that. I was like that was so frustrating to see.
And Kathy's unwillingness to even accept that, she's attempting to apologize. She's accepting your premise, whether it's right or wrong. Theresa is accepting your premise and your perception of the situation and attempting to apologize and say that that was not her intent. And, you want to talk about what your intentions are in a situation. Kathy's intentions were not to resolve this situation.
Nope.
Her,
She wanted to bury
she wanted to
Theresa.
bury her, exactly. And it's so clear because she was just rolling right over any apology, and it didn't matter whether she accepted or didn't accept, or the Kathy's premise. She just really just wanted to tear into her and lace into her. And I think that speaks a lot to Kathy's character. I don't necessarily think that we didn't already understand Kathy's character, so I don't think that we learned a lot of new stuff about her. I think we learned a lot new about Theresa, and her insecurity is very high, which we see when Gerry gets word that there's an altercation, and he comes and finds Theresa and has a conversation with her.
Can we, before
yeah.
that, I just also want to point out something that Kathy said to Theresa. She said, "You've made me feel like it's a foregone conclusion." And this is something that I just want to, again, clearly state. We are not responsible for someone else's feelings. That is Kathy's perception of what Theresa's behavior has done. We cannot make somebody feel any type of way. We are not that powerful. And so the fact that Kathy was trying to put that on Theresa was completely and wildly wrong and inappropriate. And I'm just also here to say that other people's feelings in that sense are not, we have no control over that. We don't have a responsibility for that. And so I just also didn't like that. That was incredibly manipulative. There was a different way to say, I have been feeling very insecure and feeling very sidelined as a result of what you have said. That's a completely different conversation. But as you pointed out, Kathy was not interested in resolving this. She really just wanted to make Theresa feel like shit and like stomp on this like poor, like wounded animal. That's like kicking a puppy. That's what it was.
So now Gerry does seek out Theresa later on. She's crying. They have a short conversation. This was really hard for me to watch because I think Theresa could not have handled this any worse. And I think Gerry probably could not have handled this any worse. So Theresa's framing of the situation was so self-deprecating. And maybe this is incorrect, but it kind of felt like an abuse victim who's just accepted like the abuse,
gaslit into this.
Yeah. What'd she say? She says, basically, I have made
apparently
I've apparently made Kathy feel bad, and everybody in the house agrees. We didn't talk about this, but there was a conversation between Faith and Theresa ahead of this, and Faith, gold star, fantastic. I thought she handled it so well. She sat there with Theresa. She said, I have been in the room with you. Nothing that Kathy is saying, I agree with. You have not done any of those things. You are good. Theresa has been validated and affirmed by Faith, who I think is so far demonstrated a very high character individual. Yet even after that, Faith basically departs when Gerry comes in, and she still frames this conversation as, apparently I've done, this to Kathy and everybody agrees. That to me was like, oh, you misframed this. Like the proper framing of this was Kathy's upset at me. I don't agree with her perception. I feel really bad. I tried to apologize. She doesn't seem interested in my apology. I don't want there to be tension, and I don't know how to fix it. But I feel really bad, because that's actually the truth, right? From her perspective, that is the truth. That is the proper framing. But again, this kicked puppy thing where she just comes right out and says, this is exactly, what this is Kathy's perception of it. And that's just the situation we're in right now. And of course, what does Gerry do? He asks no questions. He just says, oh, I can't believe it's Theresa that's causing the drama.
Right. What he says to Theresa, I both appreciated and was frustrated by, because his response to her was, if in your heart you don't believe you were being boastful, you should let it go. And the part of that I really liked is, again, we have no control over other people and what they're going to say about us. There's a great quote that says something like, other people's opinions of us are none of our business, because other people's opinions of us are filtered through their own lenses and perceptions and experiences. And so other people's opinions actually have nothing to do with us. And one thing that, again, often comes up in therapy is like, I'm worried so and so is going to say this negative thing about me, or I'm worried about this person bad mouthing me to someone else, and what if they believe it. And so such the really hard thing to support people in is you really just need to stay solid and secure in who you are, in your character, and what you have done, and trust that that's enough for people to form their own unique opinion about you, because you can't go around and take like the megaphone out of other people's mouths. You just need to trust that you've done as much as you can do to show people who you are. And that's hard to do. And that's essentially what Gerry was saying to her, is let your actions essentially speak for themselves. Like, continue to be you, like, and you have to just let this go. You can't necessarily like stay in this guilt situation, if especially if you don't believe that what you were doing was what Kathy's expressing. I do think he could have been a little bit more patient with her. In some ways it felt like he really didn't want to get involved at all.
Yes.
And so it felt like, the part I didn't like about it is it felt like a way to like shut her down, or shut this down. Like, I just like don't want to deal with this. Like, just let it go. But I thought,
and in his face to camera, he indicates that as well. Like, I'm not here for this. I don't want this. And definitely had a tone of like, well, Kathy, Theresa basically admitted it's her fault. So like, it's her fault.
Yeah.
And just, yeah.
Yeah. And so like that was very clear. And what was frustrating was, but Gerry, your behaviors are what is perpetuating this situation. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have it be, I don't want to deal with this, and yet you're the one who is creating this dynamic by not shutting it down, or perpetuating this dynamic by not shutting it down.
Yeah. It was hard to watch. I think everybody looked bad in that.
Yeah, right. And then we end up going into a rose ceremony where Theresa does get a rose. She gets the last rose, which is a way to send a signal that, Theresa's on thin ice, or at least that's what we're meant to believe. But typically the last rose goes to someone that the lead isn't necessarily like feeling that confident in.
Yep. I do want to point out who got the first rose, not counting Ellen and Kathy that got their date and pity roses.
Was it Faith?
It was Faith. Faith again.
Yeah, we love Faith.
Yep. I think that the big kind of disappointment for your father, at least, Edith is going home. Big fan of Edith. I was a fan of Edith, but we just haven't seen much. Had that nice pop in episode 1, and we haven't really seen anything from her in the last 2 episodes. Not surprising at all, but disappointing, because I did like. There's something about her that I do like. And then we saw Christina go home. And when she went home, my question to you was, who is that? So no big surprises there, right?
Right.
So we've got remaining Ellen, Kathy, Faith, Sandra, Leslie, Nancy, Susan, April, Theresa. 9. And we obviously lost Joan as well this week.
Right. Okay. So that wraps this episode. What was your rose and thorn this week?
My thorn this week, I think, quite frankly, it could be shared between Gerry, Kathy, and Theresa for very different reasons. But I think as the lead, Ty goes to the lead. I think the thorn has to go to Gerry. I thought there was just so many aspects of this episode beyond just the Theresa and Kathy dynamic where he really fell down for me. I need to see a backbone. I need to see him really be willing to engage in some difficult conversations outside of grief. And for that, he's getting my thorn this week. What about you?
Kind of in a similar vein. I mean, the thorn for me this week was the one-on-one date with Ellen. And just like the lacklusterness of it all, and yet continuing on with a rose. I just felt like for all that we've seen in the last 3 episodes, it just felt like on such a different playing field than every other connection we've seen. And so it was disappointing to see that conversation, to see the lack of compatibility, and yet continuing on.
I do want to point out that the conversation that Gerry and Ellen had it been on BIP, it's one of the most deep conversations that there would have been on that beach this week.
That's for sure.
And your rose?
Let's see. I think my rose goes to the show itself. Like I was saying earlier on, like this show is giving the viewers something that I don't think we even knew we needed. And so it's been healing in its own way, in its own surprising way. And so, yeah, I'll give it to the show.
Nice.
What about you?
My rose, obviously it's Karate Susan. Susan, when you're done with the show, give me a call. I will hold the boards for you. We'll take turns. It's been a few years for me, but like I'm in. Let's go break some boards together.
I do like Susan a lot.
I like Susan a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's so much fun.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so that wraps us up for this week's episode of The Golden Bachelor. And don't forget to check out the B-side, where we will be back with Bachelor in Paradise, episode 3 reactions.
And that was a doozy of an episode.
Oh, it sure was. So lots to cover and talk about there. And again, remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Bye.
See ya.